Good evening.
Good evening, Mike.
How are you doing, gentlemen?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, good, thanks.
First off, welcome, Neil. Great to have you with us today. Neil, do you want to say a little bit about who you are, how you managed to get roped in to join us two idiots on this tonight, and then, yeah, we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for inviting me. And Neil Roach, sports psychologist, done a fair amount of work within hockey, little bit of coaching, not at any particular level. Did some National League stuff in the early 2000s up to about 2010. Predominantly working at the moment within football, providing sports psych support, and how I got roped into it, I'm beginning to wonder that myself, to be honest with you. I'm sitting here thinking, how am I sitting here? Came across, met Gibbo as a result of some work that I did delivering at a UK Coaching National Conference a couple of years ago, and did a couple of sessions during that conference with a whole range of coaches from a whole load of different sport backgrounds, and he was part of my team of kind of role players in a sports psych scenario, and took on the role very well. And, yeah. And of course, when somebody does a job for you like that, and they give you the call to say, "Can you come on here?" Well, here I am.
Yeah, I thought I'd call a small favour in, but yeah, that's how.
And how was his acting? Was it any good?
Well, yeah, people thought it was me. People thought I was genuinely the coach in question when I wasn't. I was reading Neil's script, so I must have done an okay job.
He was so believable. I gave him a tough role. He had to play the role of being a coach, and he very nearly carried it off. It was impressive. It was almost as though he kind of knew what coaching was about. It was fabulous.
Crazy. Winged it, basically.
It's all in the script.
So I had that really difficult task, and I gave Roach this little tap in, and we're calling it quits after this. So, yeah. So we're going to be joined by Tess, aren't we? She's just finishing a training session. So my motivation for getting Neil on goes back to an earlier podcast where me, Mike, and Tess were talking a little bit about player anxieties, coach anxieties, people worrying about a third lockdown, not being able to play the sport they love, and how to support themselves and others through that time. So Neil's name came up in that conversation, and here we are. So I think what we'll probably do is brief what Tess mentioned in our sort of prep for this show, and then when Tess joins us, we'll just go straight in. So The first bit was sort of from Tess's perspective. She was talking a little bit around coming out of having a period off to resuming quite a difficult block of training with this new year, 2021, there being like significant selection pressure. So there was a little bit around performance anxiety and player expectations, which when Tess joins the call, I'm sure she'll get into a bit more. But what are your general thoughts on those two topics and how particularly young developing players can sort of deal with those pressures?
It is a tough time. And I think more than anything, the key word for me here is uncertainty. Uncertainty pretty much underpins anything that occurs in terms of the anxieties that we experience. And of course, for all kinds of reasons, there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. You mentioned about selection there, and you mentioned about, coming back after a period of inactivity. Well, you've just, immediately exposed two levels of uncertainty. Selection has its own uncertainties. And of course, when you've either been training by yourself or you've not, and you've not played for a period of time, there is that added uncertainty of not knowing what other people have been up to, not knowing how you're going to perform when you come back into that, team type scenario. And so I think for me, it's a case of just perhaps to a certain extent normalizing that. Everybody's going to be experiencing it. Everybody's going to be feeling the same anxieties, and in some ways, if you're working in a group scenario, I think the first thing I'd probably want to do is let everybody know what everybody else is. Let everybody else know what it is that you're feeling. So I think normalizing it becomes quite useful, because then you set a slightly different baseline to previously. And once you start to realize that actually everybody is going through the same thing, you can get to the stage where you become anxious about being anxious. Whereas if you have this realization that actually everybody else is feeling the same as you, you still have to deal with it, but it doesn't make it something which is extraordinary. And so, the uncertainty is certainly, I think, that the underpinning of a lot of the issues that arise. So anything that you can do which addresses that, I think, is quite important.
Really, really cool point. Matt, do you have something?
Yeah, no, it was just really a question. So you mentioned there about normalizing it. Are there any kind of and you said about kind of making obviously people realize that we're all in the same boat. Like, it's been a really tough kind of 9 months now. It feels like far longer, but it's tough old 9 months. How have you got any kind of mechanisms or anything that would help? Obviously not only just your elite athletes, but also maybe some 16, 17-year-olds who are maybe potentially looking to like their junior England tryouts, or just maybe getting on the fringe of the first team and then being locked down again. Like, they've got different anxieties as well. But are there any mechanisms to like help them get through and create that normalization?
I think as I mentioned there, one of the ways of doing it, and that can be stimulated by coaches, or it can be stimulated by individuals. I think it's more difficult to be stimulated by individuals, to actually have a chat with the other people in your team, in your squad. Maybe if you're competing against others for a place in a squad, that becomes a little bit more difficult. But just articulating what your emotions are and how it's affecting you, because I think that has quite a big impact. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is that what tends to happen is there tends to be this culture based around compensating for lost time, this kind of hurry up, and inevitably, that has its impact as well, because once you start to rush things, that starts to heap anxiety, upon the anxiety that people may already be experiencing, because you think you've got to all of a sudden, do things at a greater rate. You've got this idea of catch up. And I think this is probably something that it's almost an unsaid kind of culture change when you come back from any period, whether we're in COVID or not. You talk about injuries and upcoming selections or matches or whatever it may be. Any scenario where the culture kind of gets based around the idea of compensating for lost time has all kinds of dangers attached to it. And I think what you end up doing is you end up looking for a curve which has got greater acceleration, and all that ends up resulting in is actually a whole load of deceleration, because it brings around a whole load of factors that and behaviors, thought processes, and behaviors which end up being counterproductive and maladaptive as well. You get greater number of injuries and there's a whole load of things that all of a sudden, especially for the youngsters, a whole load of things that you just don't get as much time to do. You don't get as much time to, in between sessions, to be able to reflect on what coaches have said. You don't get an opportunity to be able to think about the feedback that you've been given. And so this kind of slow burn process of understanding what coaches have said and what it is that they're after kind of it becomes, a little bit of a churn. It becomes a little bit of a maelstrom. I'm anxious. and I'm trying to catch up, and I'm trying to reflect on what I've been told to do, and I've got to get it in quickly. And all of a sudden, you're actually building upon what has already been there, and probably actually making it worse. And so,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you think
go ahead, Mike.
Part of that is obviously social media impact? People seeing maybe their friends doing additional training, their friends doing skill work, seeing all these workshops going up, and we'll talk from a coach's aspect in a second because I think that's a whole different ball game. But seeing all their friends maybe posting, "Oh, I've done this exercise, I've done this workout, I've attended this workshop," and and maybe there's that feeling of, "Oh my God, I need to attend everything," to then feel like I'm moving forwards and that I'm ready for when we get back, and that kind of, like you say, that desire to hurry up. Do you think that?
Yeah, I think it's all pervasive, isn't it? If you've got friends that know that you've got selection coming up, how are you getting on? And they're asking the question. You've got keen parents who have desires for you and your career. They want you to do well, and then of course you add the other layer of what you've just talked about in terms of social media, seeing other people, and all of a sudden it becomes a merry-go-round, and yeah, I think if you put all of those things together, like I say, it's almost an unwritten. You just end up within this culture, and it can be perpetuated by a lot of things and people around you.
You've seen in like a new these lockdowns the last 9-10 months, you've seen a new sort of social media post, haven't you? The ones that almost sort of shaming people into not, if you've not learned a language or a new skill during lockdown, you're wasting your time kind of post. And I think if you're susceptible to that and that's your feed and you're taking that in every day, you're probably telling yourself you're wasting your days, you're not doing enough, and that anxiety can build up over time. And it's not too different in the hockey world. If you see a lot of things happening, a lot of things, workshops, people doing stuff on skills mats, you might not have the space or the resource to do that. That can build up a picture of you getting left behind, and then those feelings of catching up really get heightened. But it's definitely a new thing I've noticed on all forms of social media, from like Twitter to LinkedIn, like the lockdown humble brag, I'm doing this with my lockdown, what are you doing type posts. And I think they're a little bit nauseating, but they're not actually good for the who are they helping. Just a bit of a rant there, Neil, sorry, but I can see how they add to the anxiety.
I've still not learned how to make sourdough. I feel like I'm the only guy in the world who's not made sourdough. I'm okay with that. So then moving, I think we'll revisit the player stuff when Tess comes back in. But I think from a coach aspect, I was delivering a course just today and talking to coaches about it. We were talking about ideals and everything else, and we had a break, and I came back and I reflected during the small break, and I was like, actually, we're not in a position where we can deliver to our ideal right now. So I made a real point when I came back to them and talked to these coaches about making sure that they don't put pressure on themselves to feel like they have to execute everything that everyone ever says, particularly when we come out of lockdown. I think there's going to be a load of coaches thinking, oh my God, I've got to do 1,001 things. And I think that's something which we've got to be really careful of as people who are then delivering that to others, like that care and responsibility to ourselves, because that then is going to reflect on our players. Have you seen coaches like managing it well, struggling? Like, how have you seen coaches kind of dealing with the lockdown and then coming back out hopefully pretty soon?
Yeah, I think it's just a reflection of people generally in society. It's a job. For some, it's a pastime. For others, and everybody is dealing with this in their own way. I do agree with you that we've just been talking about this catch-up culture, this compensating for time, and I think especially for coaches whose whole identity is based around being a coach, is based around helping other people. When you've had a period of where you feel perhaps you've been a little bit inactive in fulfilling that identity, there is this kind of desire to let it all out that's been frustrated for that length of time and that period of time. And I think there is, again, that's partly where that danger. We talked about social media, we talked about parents. I think coaches, well-meaning, I have to say, in a lot of circumstances, but perhaps thinking, right, okay, well, is my first session back after lockdown? I've got to do what we would normally do at this stage of the season, but I've also got to maybe reprise what we did when we last were together. And I've just got to make sure that all of those things that we did during the first part of the season are all ingrained as well. And now all of a sudden, you've got first session back or first couple of sessions back. You've got 3 aims.
And you've got the 101 new ideas that you've just been learning.
Absolutely.
Through podcasts, reading 100 books.
Yeah,
attending 20 odd workshops. You've all of a sudden got only all these brand new ideas that you're like, oh my god, I need to do all of these things.
Yes, and I think that is made. I think that's inevitable, and to a certain extent, that's a good thing. People trying to develop, self-development and trying to take, the coaching, what coaches deliver, trying to take it forward and get better themselves. And that's an honourable thing to do, and why wouldn't we applaud that? I do think it's made worse in that situation where we have coaches for whom coaching is their sole identity.
Well, that resonated with me first time you said it, Neil, because the first thing I thought about was lockdown 1. I was definitely guilty of the workshop overloader. There was something on Twitter, you'd sign up, you'd do it, because it was not just the content, it was the interaction with other coaches, and you got to feel like you were doing a version of your job. And then, like in this last lockdown, I was just saying to Mike before you joined us that I've done the same presentation on goal scoring 4 times in the last week, for just doing it for nothing. People just going and again, just feel like you're interacting with players and the coaches, because you feel like, and my motivation for doing that is just to feel the feeling of being busy and a little bit of getting better at online delivery, because part of me thinks this is here to stay to an extent, doing stuff over on these formats. But yeah, that definitely resonated when you think you'd want to feel like you're doing a version of your job, even in these circumstances. And if you start to feel far removed from your job, that's something that I wouldn't be comfortable with, and having like that extended period away. And it does beg the question, well, why wouldn't you be comfortable with that? And that's sort of made me reflect on a few things. Definitely,
it does cause an outflow. I want to be able to. Even if you haven't done any reflection or development over lockdown periods as a coach, which I suspect most have taken the opportunity to do that, or indeed, Mike, to learn how to bake sourdough. But there is this, there's this pent up. I'm not doing. I am a coach. I coach, and I want to be getting out there and delivering and helping others, but also getting the rewards as well. And of course, one of the things that both is common between both players and coaches over this period of not being able to do what you normally do is that there's far less reinforcement that you're getting. From a coaching point of view, you don't get to be able to go, oh, that was a good session, or oh, that wasn't a good session. You don't get players coming up to you and asking you questions. You don't feel as though you're being as helpful. And for players, especially for those who more exclusively have whatever sport, we're obviously talking hockey at the moment, but whatever sport, more exclusively would normally on a day-to-day basis get their reinforcement from something that they're really good at, and not getting reinforcement. And for the youngsters, they're also not getting reinforcement from their mates. They're not getting reinforcement from a schooling perspective, and so all of a sudden you've taken away reinforcement, especially of things that you happen to be good at, and that's quite, for a lot of people, that's quite uncomfortable. And
a friend of mine was I've had two friends which have done some really big expeditions. So one did Everest and one did Antarctica, and they talk a lot about what happens post expedition, and that kind of like I was known for the Antarctica one. It was a 7-year preparation.
Yeah.
So he was known as the guy that was going to do Antarctica. He then did it, and then it was like, okay, well, what do I do now? Like, and his whole identity shifted literally overnight from I'm the guy that's doing this, I'm working up to it. Okay, well, I've done it, but what was the point? What was the meaning? Like, and that whole struggle of identity was so big. And he's definitely someone I want to get on this as well. If you're very interested, a guy called Joe Doherty. And it's that identity struggle, and I think that's I guess something which we're all going through right now. Obviously, Gibbo and myself are full-time coaches. That's what we do. It's what we love. To not have that, you're then like, well, who am I? Like, what am I? Like, how do I fit in the world? And I think that's massive.
So we're all dealing with a long-term injury. The players have this when they have the 9-month recoveries on a bad injury. You get that. You hear players say, feel like I'm losing my identity because I've lost my routine, I've lost my engagement. But kind of everyone's having that, apart from the massive rehab. But that lack of engagement, that's the one. Yeah, it's the main thing that we're not all going through. But that lack of engagement, lack of routine, it's filling. Sometimes you just feel like you are filling the void.
Yeah, it is a difficult scenario. I suppose to a certain extent, you could argue that the way that you frame it, either as a coach or a player, this is a challenge. One of the things that we know that sports people are good at is taking challenges on, and to a certain extent, if you frame the scenario as being a challenge, and it's a challenge to overcome, and the opposition is lockdown and tears, both types, then ways of overcoming those opponents actually becomes something that you can focus on, and that becomes a challenge to overcome, and there is a level of competitiveness, and there is that's one way of doing it, but it is definitely difficult in those circumstances.
Just to go back to the coaching point that Mike raised there and just kind of reframe it. So what are I don't know how to frame the question. There's a positive way or a negative way. I'm going to do it negatively to be controversial. What are the things that coaches should avoid with players? So what would be the big mistakes that a coach could make with players coming back out of this period in terms of managing expectations and maybe putting undue pressure on people after as they resume play? So say 3 months down the line, we get back to doing some form of training. What could the pitfalls be for a coach putting pressure on a player in that context, and how would you alleviate that, if that makes sense?
It certainly does. It does depend a lot on how long we're going to be locked down for. Mm-hmm. And obviously the first lockdown was much longer than I think people had an expectation of. I think we've already discussed one thing, and that is for coaches when we do come back eventually, for coaches, for themselves, but also for the people that they're coaching, to try to probably avoid the culture of catch up, the compensating for lost time. I think if you did nothing else, if your kind of philosophy for coming back was based exclusively on trying to avoid that, you'd probably actually avoid a whole load of issues that would come about that you would want to avoid. And I've done a few webinars across different sports and also for UK coaching, and I think that has been probably the biggest thing of the lot. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing is something that we as humans all do when we to do with expectations. You mentioned the word expectations there.
Yeah.
We as human beings, all of us, when we think about, especially in a situation where somebody, you talked about selection earlier, and inevitably in a coach performer, in a coach player interaction, there is a level of there being a power dynamic there. In any situation where any of us have somebody who is potentially going to be evaluating us, or that we look up to as human beings, when we look at that person and we have a think about what their expectations are of us, we tend to elevate our view of what those expectations are.
Mm.
And the difficulty in those circumstances is that, if you've got a decent coach, the coach will know what you're capable of. So actually their expectations and what they ask you to do as a player are pretty much at the level of what you're capable of. Yeah, they might be pushing you a bit, but they're pretty much around about that level. The difficulty is that if as human beings, we view others' expectations of us as higher than what they actually are, so we view that person's expectations as higher than what their actual expectations are, which one are we going to aim at?
Yeah.
We're going to aim at the expectations that we think they have of us.
Yeah.
Now, if the way we view that person's expectations are inevitably high and higher than what we are capable of, we're going to be aiming at something that's not attainable. And there's only ever going to be one conclusion from that, and that is going to be that it's going to end up with constant failure.
Mm.
It's constant failure against your perception of what somebody's expectations are of you.
It's that perception, that's the killer.
Absolutely. It's got nothing to do with reality. It's got to do with the fact that we as human beings pretty much all view that person's expectations as higher of us, because we want to we want to please them, we want to demonstrate that we have ability, we want to, and especially in a selection scenario, that gap tends to get raised a little bit more as well. So what we end up with here is we end up with a situation where, through probably no fault of the coach, performers will aim at something which is always going to result in them overreaching. If they're aiming at something that they're overreaching, a number of consequences come from that. The first is they're going to see quite a lot of failure against what it is they're aiming for, not necessarily against and actually in that circumstance, it's made worse by the fact that because you're overreaching, you actually end up not even achieving at the level that you're capable of.
Yeah.
So now we have a double failure, because you have a failure in your own mind as a player because you haven't reached what you think those expectations are, and in the coach's mind, you haven't even reached what they think that you're capable of.
So how do we coaches?
That's the question I'd have.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do we guard against those perceptions of us then in the environments we're in?
That
so
becomes
go back to the workshop you did 2 years ago when I was a guest on it, Neil, about everything. Like you said, made a really good point about everything has pressure. Everything comes with pressure. Like your demeanor can create a perception of pressure. The badge on your chest, if you work in England, or a Loughborough badge, that can create pressure.
Yeah.
Your who you praise and how you do it creates a perception of where the level is, and like everything creates a bit of pressure for that player. So what are the things to be mindful of from a coaching background to guard against that ever increasing perceived level of expectation?
I think that there's one key thing which has two elements, and I know the response that I've had from a lot of coaches in a lot of sports. I'm not necessarily saying this is universal. I'm not saying your audience would necessarily give this answer, but one thing with two elements to it. the first thing you've got to do is you've got to let players know what it is that is your expectations as a coach. The difficulty is, as we've already seen, is that players will hear those words and they'll fill in the gaps. So they'll add their own. Tess has joined us. Hi, Tess.
Sorry, in the middle of your sentence.
I know. And that's now, I can't remember what I was going to say now. So that's the end of that.
No,
answer.
I was listening. Players fill in the gaps.
Here we go. You see, you actually in the last 12 seconds, you've paid more attention than either of these two guys have for the whole week. That's genius. I love that.
This is the glue that holds this whole thing together.
There we go. All of a sudden, this thing's got meaning now. Tess is
Oh my gosh.
Without Tess, and we've probably been treading water, Neil. It'll get good for now.
I'll be honest with you. I've just been waiting for this minute. I've just been waiting.
So, Tess,
Pleasure to meet you, Neil.
I'll carry on for a moment until somebody stops me. Yeah. It is the scenario that we know that players fill in the gaps, because we've already said that we know that we as human beings will view others' expectations of us as higher than what they actually are. So it's all very well and good, coaches, and I can almost hear it now from people that are listening. I can hear coaches saying, well, yeah, I absolutely do tell players what the expectations are. Unfortunately, that doesn't do the job. It's important, but the real important part of the communication is to make sure that we cut the legs from the bit where players will fill in the gap and add that bit on top. So not only should we be telling players what our expectations are, the key is to tell players what our expectations are not.
Yeah.
And that second part is actually probably the vital piece of the jigsaw, because we're pretty sure that we know that at the start of a session, coaches, especially good coaches, will say, what is it we're doing today? What are the expected outcomes? What am I hoping to get from you? What am I looking to achieve? How does this fit into the season? How does this fit into the phase of the coaching process at the moment? But that still leaves that opportunity for players to fill in the gaps and go, well, I know you said you want that, but I also know that you probably want this and this and this as well. And what we've got to do as coaches is we've got to cut the legs from underneath that. We've got to try and make that gap between what players perceive coaches' expectations are of us and our own ability and what the actual expectations are. We've got to try and reduce that gap. It'll never go to zero, but we've got to try and reduce it rather than letting it go in the other direction. And if you're in a selection scenario as well, that only gets higher.
Yeah.
Because you start looking for things that coaches will expect. And the damaging thing here in terms of communication is that if I tell you what my expectations are of you, and if I'm really good and I tell you what my expectations are not, then hopefully I've closed that gap. But if 30 minutes later, during the middle of the session, I congratulate somebody for doing a cross-field aerial that was 40 meters long, all the other players that is not an expectation of pick up on that and go, oh, right, so that's what coach wants. And all of a sudden you start to extend that gap again.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really, really careful at going, if I say, oh, great ball. Or yes, that's what, that's the area we're trying to attack. No, not you lot.
Yeah.
That's what I want you doing. I don't want anybody else doing that. So it really is about the two elements of the communication are about what my expectations are, but for lockdown, for selection, for just in general, making absolutely sure that players don't fill those gaps that are there, and we tell them what we don't expect and what we're not expecting. Does that answer your question, Gibbo?
Yeah, it does, and it's brought some stuff flooding back from your model that you present on the day, the perceptions of demand and the perceptions of your own performance, and really interesting stuff and thank you for recapping it again. I guess this gives a nice opportunity to circle back to Tess, because we asked your question because we didn't know where you would be with training finishing. So we asked a bit when you talked to me and Mike about coming into this phase, into 2021 phase, and there's stuff on the horizon, selection points, and just how you're feeling now with like a challenging block of training and stuff coming up. What's the process that you're going through? And just if you wanted to, you'd articulate that better than I did. So if you want to do that, and then Neil can pick up and add on to what he already talked about, that'd be useful.
Yeah, I've been in a bit of a strange headspace because I've been managing an injury for the last couple of months, and I was almost back at the beginning of the week, and then had a setback again, and so I'm starting again, and my headspace has really changed over the last couple of months between seeing rehab as an opportunity to get fitter and develop strength and things like that, and then the disappointment of it taking longer than I thought, and the fears of like people almost like catching me up or losing my place or things like that, and watching the hockey. And then I had a meeting with our coaches today, and I've come out in a completely different headspace, because it kind of links to what you said about the expectations and what they expect of me and what they don't. And they don't expect me to be on the pitch tomorrow, so that's obviously out of my control straight away, but they do expect me to work as hard as I can to get back on the pitch. And then I said to them, there's going to be some like feelings around trying to, I don't know, almost prove myself when I'm back. Like that will probably naturally happen, but I'm going to try really hard to not let that happen, because they said the only thing that we expect of you is to be yourself, and that's kind of what we want. We don't want you to try and be someone else in the team. We just want you to be you, and that's all we expect of you. And that kind of links nicely to what you were saying, because it kind of settled me down, and my like heart rate completely dropped, and I was feeling much more relaxed and felt like things were in my control again. So that's kind of where I've been at the moment. And then, yeah, we had a training move to 3 to 5. And then obviously training only ever finishes at 5:30. So here I am.
Yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed that you've allowed training to take precedence over Mike's podcast. That's fine. We now know where your priorities lie. That's great. I love that. And what you've just said there, I mean, halfway through you talked about, you mentioned about other players catching up, and you had the other, the three of us all smiled at the same time, because one of the key things that we've talked about when Gibbo did his role playing and was role playing as you for a little bit earlier, and putting that question as kind of as you've set it out there, one of the things that we talked about was trying to avoid the culture of catch up. The culture of compensating for lost time, whatever that means. So when you said, about worrying about other people catching you up and you wanting to accelerate and get, staying ahead, that was something that we had as that discussion. And as you've quite rightly said there, coaches have told you what the expectations are, but they've brilliantly told you what the expectations are not as well. And that actually, ironically, was probably, as you said there, the thing that calmed you down a little bit.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, there's a great example of good practice in terms of doing the thing in terms of expectations, but also cutting the legs off your aim to try and go over and above that and achieve a set of expectations which you think they might have of you, which now they actually don't. So that works beautifully. And if we weren't in a COVID scenario and we weren't in a post-injury or end stage injury rehab process, you would try and develop at a particular rate. That rate over your career as something that you have established as the rate which is most optimal for you to be able to improve on things, to see development, etc. That's the rate that you're looking at, because there is such a fine line that if you go above that, there's a possibility of the kind of breakdown that you talked about earlier on this week. And if you're below that, then you're probably not satisfying your own desire to want to see development occurring. So yeah, it becomes a very, very fine line.
So in my first, I guess, 2 years of being part of the team, you think a rate of progression, and so that's the rate of progression that I want to see consistently.
The reception just went there. Do you mind just repeating that, Tess? Sorry, I just missed.
Sorry.
No, I just missed the first part of what you said.
So when you talk about rates of progress, do you mean that over the last 2 years I've been accelerating at a certain pace, or the last 5 years, and I expect that to happen for the rest of my career? But that's what I want, but it's not necessarily going to happen that way. Is that what you're saying?
It's not going to happen that way. But you during that time presumably will have kind of gauged where you have felt comfortable in terms of the amount of work that you're doing and the amount of progress that you have control of in terms of what it is that you do to try and improve. And I think it's a case of trying to look for that comfort zone when you feel as though you're pushing it a bit too much. Probably with experience, you actually are. If you feel as though it's not quite going, I'd probably be a little bit careful of the wanting to push on a little bit more. But I'd certainly, if you are feeling as though, I'm starting to almost getting to the stage where the next foot that's going down as I'm racing towards improvement, it's not because I'm going along smoothly. I'm putting my next foot down in order to stop me from falling. When you get to that stage, that becomes the stage to go, actually, I'm probably just starting to feel a little bit out of my comfort zone. And for very good reason, if you're feeling uncomfortable, that's probably a red flag in terms of pushing yourself too hard, working to expectations which are probably not realistic, other people's predominantly. And so I think, especially when you've got to your level, you're absolutely right. There probably has been, you've noticed an acceleration which has increased, but you've probably felt comfortable with that. And I think that's a good gauge of where you are and where you want to be carrying on. We're all reasonably good at knowing what we want, but we're also reasonably good at knowing how comfortable we are in how much we're doing to achieve that. And I think, paying attention to that becomes really important, and you're doing a double one, because that's coming back from lockdown, but it's also coming back from injury. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it's the thing that coaches tell me the most is to just be patient, and that over time progression will happen, and it doesn't happen overnight. I want to see results quickly, and so I think as a young player in a team where you have senior athletes who are at the end, in their mature stage of their career, they know who they are as a player, and I'm still learning all of those attributes, figuring it out, have a strong sense of identity, but want to see where that can go, sort of thing. And so in a team environment, my question, I guess, is like, how do you manage you're looking at these players who know who they are on the pitch, and you want to aspire to have that, but you've got to remember that you're on your own journey.
Yeah, I think that comparison sometimes becomes quite dangerous, doesn't it? That looking at other people that are everybody's at slightly different stages, everybody's accelerating at different rates, I'm reminded of somebody the other day that did a session with some youngsters and put a map of a city that all of the youngsters were familiar with, put a map up on the wall and said, right, I want you to go from where we are in this room here today. and I want you to end up at this place here. And he marked a place on the map, and he got them all individually to say how they would get there. And so it was different forms of transport, and some took roads that they were familiar with. Some took roads that were a little bit kind of straighter going there. Others took scenic routes and went via places that they liked. And when they'd all finished, the start point and the end point were exactly the same. But everybody took a different route. And the point that he was making was that, if you spend your time looking at what direction other people are going and thinking that's the right route, well, that, and you try and follow them, now you're going where you don't know. And you might, if they get through the traffic lights and you don't, all of a sudden you find yourself in that situation where now you've got no idea where you're going. So you go and you choose you plot your own way to get to where we're going. And we'll all do it slightly differently, but we will all end up at the same place. And that ultimately, in a team environment, I thought that was quite a nice way of looking at it for the youngsters to think about that. Which way would be best for you in order to be able to get you there, make sure you arrive, and not have too many blips along the way. And of course, there'll be areas that you go through of the city that you're not familiar with. There'll be areas that you're unfamiliar with, but we're all trying to get to the same point, but it doesn't have to be on the same roads.
I think that's massive, and I think it's just not from a team perspective. That's from, I run my own business, so you're running your own business. You're comparing your business to other people's business. You're a coach comparing yourself to other coaches, player to other players. Like we're all traveling in the same direction, but it's all about, like you say, like being happy on your own route and not worrying about somebody else's route in which they're getting there.
And one way, just to finish off, Tess, it's always difficult in these scenarios, taking a case study. We've been, you gave me that scenario and that took you 30 seconds to outline. This is the first time that we've ever spoken to each other. It's unlikely that I'm going to be able to give you an idea from a bespoke point of view what I'd be doing in these scenarios, and probably your coaches know you, and you may work with a psych anyway. And it doesn't have to be a psych. It can be somebody that knows you. It doesn't have to be you that plots that journey. It's you plus somebody else or a number of other people, whereby, I'd be, if you and I were sitting down, I'd be working out, trying to find out as quickly as I could, in the best way that I could. I'd be trying to find out what it is that you think you're good at. I'd be trying to find out what things would be likely to turn you on to want to do certain things, which things are in your comfort zone, which things are out of your comfort zone, and use a little bit of those to be able to decide, what it was that was your journey, by just having some input into it, with you leading that. But that recipe is going to be different for you than it is for the person who's in the room next door to you. You can't give anything generic. You have to kind of make it tailored to the individual. And there are some things that will push you. There will be some things that light your fire and keep you going, which other people might not see as relevant or interesting or whatever. So there's that kind of, you've got to be a little bit careful with it. I'm giving some fairly general advice, but it does need to be dovetailed to and tailored to what it is that's that is specific to you.
That's really cool. I think we've probably got time for one more question. I know it's a slightly longer episode than normal, but there is some absolute gold here. Tess, have you got any more? Have you got anything else that you're keen to kind of ask and go through whilst we've got Neil with us?
Many things.
You've got one. Go for it.
One thing. Okay.
You've got one, and it's going to be a short one. Yeah.
Okay. I've got a question around maintaining like a level head, not letting the ups get you up and the downs get you down. And I think I'd be most interested in how you manage the ups, because I'm someone who enjoys, I guess, reliving the good moments, whether that be in hockey or in personal life. And I've heard this phrase, don't let the ups get you up and the downs you down. And I'm pretty good at getting myself out of a down place. I know my strategies, but I tend to run away, I think, with the ups. So I wonder if you have any advice.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That phrase that you've used, it's interesting that you've identified that actually the upsides are the ones that are the more difficult things. That tends not to be the case with the majority of performers that I work with. You know, they're more worried about the dips and how to get out of those. So that's fascinating. And again, we just talked a minute ago about what is it specific to you that we would plot the journey for you. You've just said that you're okay about getting out of the troughs, getting out of the dips. That would be very different than somebody else. So when we're plotting your journey, we absolutely are answering the question that you've just asked. We're thinking about the times when things are going well. I use the phrase, hold on to the line. I don't know whether you have any interest in space travel, but the idea of, you know, when astronauts go outside of their craft and they, you know, they do a spacewalk, they are tethered to the craft by a being latched onto a fairly short line, which is attached to a very tight, taut and strong wire, which goes from one end of the craft to the other. And it basically means that they can float around, but they're never going to be any further from that line than the length of the tether that they've got to that line. And I kind of try and put that picture together for people to say, let's use this phrase, hold on to the line. Yeah, we can go above. We don't want to go too far above. We can go below. Don't go too far below. So that's the, you know, that's the picture. That's the kind of illustration. That's the imagery that you might want to use when somebody uses that phrase. The biggest thing for me is I don't mind the emotions that go with what you've just talked about. Yeah, those kind of highs, those elations, that happiness, that desire and fulfillment. I'm quite happy with all of those. The only times that they become dangerous are when they become behaviors. So all emotions that any of us have are inevitably all followed by a behavior of some kind. Yeah, doesn't matter what the emotion is, doesn't matter what the behavior is, but they will be inextricably linked. Doing nothing is a behavior. Yeah. So in some circumstances, you'll have emotions where you go, oh, I'm not bothering. That's a behavior. Doing nothing is a behavior. On the other end of that scale, doing lots, in very generic terms, when you have emotions which result in behaviors that take you away from what it is that you are supposed to do, they elevate you into the area where you're aiming at expectations which are inappropriate, which perceptually are wrong, etc. So for me, I'm not bothered about, I want you to have those. I'd love it for you to be elated. I want you to be happy. I want you to be fulfilled. I want you to be excited. I want you to have all of those. But my caution is always going to be, tell me, and this is where you and I would sit down, tell me what behaviors those emotions bring about. Because it's the behaviors that it brings about that are the things that will undermine what it is that you're trying to achieve. They're the things that will cause you to do, you know, behave in a maladaptive way. They'll cause you to work too hard. They'll cause you to do things where you get ahead of yourself. So don't worry too much. For me, and you know, different people might go about this differently. We all have different ways of operating. For me, I have no bother with the emotional responses. I don't want in any way to dampen those down. Enjoy it. But have a think for yourself, write down each one of the emotions that you've had which have been positive in the last 2 years of your career, and tell me in general, because there will be patterns, because we are all animals of habit. We do things fairly constantly in certain circumstances. Tell me what those habits are. Write those habits down. Tell me when you have an emotion of this, what do you do? What is the behaviors that come with it? Do you go out and do an extra training session? Do you try and hit the ball harder? Do you try and manage the impression others have of you a little bit more? Do you try and hold back the emotions that you display to other people? Do you not? Tell me what those behaviors are, and then you yourself will start to work out which ones of those behaviors are the ones that are taking you away from what it is that you should be doing. And that will enable you to be able to hold on to the line. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think of it in a performance sort of way, and like I've heard, aim for a 6 out of 10, but my brain doesn't want to aim for a 6 out of 10. It wants to aim for a 10 out of 10. And so when I achieve the 10 out of 10, which it will never happen, but that's what I'm aiming for. Let's say it's like a 9 out of 10 in my own head, then the behaviors, I guess, that you're talking about, they trick me into thinking that will happen again. And so when I do perform then like a 6 out of 10, for me in my brain, it's like a 2 out of 10, and then that spirals. So that's really interesting to think about, enjoying the fact that you have performed well or you've had a good time, and then coming back to sort of a ground zero to restart again. I wonder if that's sort of like you wake up in the morning and you reset sort of thing.
You can do it how you want. Again, it needs to be tailored to how you know, if you're good at that, if you're good at reset, do reset. Yeah. I've just worked with a guy, just very quickly. I've just worked with a guy, Indian guy, just did the Dakar rally. Are you all familiar with the Dakar rally? Paris, yeah. It used to be Paris to Dakar. This year, it was in Saudi Arabia for lots of geopolitical reasons. This guy is just like all of us in a sport which is slightly different. The guy, you know, I mean, you do the Dakar rally, that's 3,500 miles on a bike in 12 days. Yeah, you're doing 300, 400 miles on dunes through rocks where nobody, you know, the only people you see out, the only things you see out there are camels. And when he's doing well, he gets worse because he gets confident, and the behaviors for him that come with confidence involves him pulling the accelerator.
Wow.
So now all we're doing with him in terms of holding the line are going, when you're doing well, slow down. Not slow down. We're using the phrase slow down, but in his terms, he wants to be going slower than what he thinks he's capable of, because otherwise he's going to hit a camel or he's going to hit a rock. And he's not just going to end his rally, he's going to die.
Mm.
Yeah?
Big time.
So in those circumstances, we needed to find out what the behaviors were that came about as a result of the confidence emotions that he was experiencing. So his mantra was, hold on to the line, do the process. When I'm confident, slow down. Actually, that didn't mean slow down. That meant go back to, relatively speaking, what his optimum pace was for him to be able to be safe, for him to be able to do his navigation whilst on a bike in 45 degrees of heat, when there is no trees, no lampposts, just dunes, where you have no idea where you're going other than just having some instructions. Drive 17 miles and then turn 70 degrees right. Yeah. So he's got to do all of that. Now, you know what? If he goes too fast, he may not crash, but he may go 18 miles. Now what? Now what angle have you got to go? So he's got to do all of those things. So we needed to make sure that we worked for a year solidly on being able to get him to hold on to the line. He came in 20th. He's just finished last weekend. He came in 20th. The highest Indian ranked ever was 38th before that. And so he's absolutely delighted. And every day we spoke via the wonders of modern technology. And I could just hear him say, I went slow today and my navigation was brilliant. And there were people in the top 10 who were going past me once. And then they were passing me again. He said one guy in the top 10 passed me 4 times on one day. Well, that's because That's because he was going too quickly and went wrong and had to circle round and come back and re-overtake him. And that's the balance you've got. So do not do anything with those emotions. Enjoy them. Have all the positive ones you possibly can. But just have a think about what behaviours happen with you, not with anybody else. Think about what behaviours and also what other thoughts, because what tends to happen is you get this upward spiral. Just like you get the downward spiral, you get the upward spiral. You get that confidence and you go, oh, I'm going to have some more of that. And therefore, I'm going to do this. And you're going to try things. And all of a sudden, risk-taking behaviours start. And that's when your 9s become 3s.
Really
I hope I've given at least just one perspective on answering your question there, Tess.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Really cool. Right, I think we're going to end it there. That hour has gone so fast. Like I've been in awe, just loving listening to you today, Neil. So I just want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for your time and thank you for some incredible insights. Yeah, I genuinely thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for in other circumstances, I'd never have had the opportunity to see Gibbo role play as Tess. That's done it for me.
I can't wait to see this.
Yeah. I suppose, Neil, we're even now, aren't we?
We are. Yeah. That's what. Yeah.
But no, thank you
very much.
No, really enjoyed this, and thank you for coming on and agreeing to do it, and sharing your time. It's been an hour on the call and half an hour before that, so really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Great to meet you, Neil. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good luck, Tess. Say hi to Sabby for me, will you?
I will.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tess. Thank you for joining us eventually. And we look forward to seeing all of you lot next week. Thank you all very much again. See you later.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.